And good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. We are celebrating the National Public Service Recognition Week here with Brenda Braceful, one of the city's great employees and a great example of public servant, and a current member of our Detroit Civil Service Commission. And so I wanted to have her on and talk to her a little bit of the history of what civil service means and where it came from, and a little bit of what public service means to her along her 29-year journey in public service with the city that continues to roll on because she's serving in this capacity for the Civil Service Commission. And I think I will ask a few questions about that too, Brenda. Welcome this afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. And I want to add my accolades to all those who serve so tirelessly in public service.
Yes, it is a great, meaningful place to work. And I said in the panel discussion, and I will say again, you know, you could have been out there just Brenda Braceful Esquire and had, you know, that Johnny Cochran level, bless his memory, kind of practice. But you decided to use that brain trust and brilliance to further and advance the causes of the city of Detroit. Why did you choose this path of public service, Brenda?
Well, I'm a native Detroiter, and my dad was part of the Great Migration. He came here from Alabama, and they instilled in us, you know, a love of God, appreciation for education, and also a need to be of service. You know, we lived in the, well, it's not Rosa Parks, but it was the 12th Street area. And we saw the ravages of the riot, and my parents elected to stay in that area. They were part of the group that helped develop the shopping center right there at Rosa Parks and Euclid under Mayor Coleman Young, and used to serve as election workers. And so I just came to appreciate that, you know, given all the benefits that we were deriving from being in the community, we owed it to the community to try and make sure those benefits were available to everyone else. So it wasn't a huge leap for me to gravitate toward a career in public service. Okay. And it has been very gratifying.
And so you came into public service into the law department. So talk to us about those early days in law.
You know, it's interesting. I was thinking about this when you asked me. And, you know, back in the early 80s, it seems so long ago now, the city was really coming into its own. Like I said, Coleman Young was ushering in a new culture. And one of my first assignments was to help establish a unit dedicated to the police department. We would both defend and educate the police department. And looking back, I can see why in Detroit, you know, clearly there have been some challenges with our police service, but we didn't have the same level of shootings. And I think part of that is Mayor Young came in and he was concerned about stress, and that was one of the first things that he, you know, targeted. And so there was a determined effort to try and have a better selection process, a better education process, and to help people realize that you are there to protect and serve. And so when I look and see that even now, we still have some, you know, very questionable shootings, unjustified pursuits of young African-American men, you know, my heart is still bleeding for the young man who was just shot by, you know, two, quote, vigilantes. And so much of that comes from lack of education, lack of exposure, and lack of leadership. And so it was gratifying to be part of the development of the police affairs unit and to work with the police department in terms of training and education. And then later in my career with the law department, we were once again facing some fiscal challenges, which seemed to be a recurring theme. And it was necessary to spin off some of the institutions that the city has supported for years. And many people forget that when they look at the history of the city. The Detroit Institute of Arts, the Historical Museum, and the zoo had long received subsidies from the city to remain in operation, even though they were regional treasures.
Mm-hmm.
And so working with people like Barbara Wise Johnson and the budget team, we worked day and night to help successfully spin off those institutions, as well as negotiate contracts so that no one lost their jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And I often tell the story that sometimes we'd show up in the morning to work on the historical museum, go home, take a shower, come back and work on the zoo, get up the next morning and repeat the process. And those spinoffs were effectuated in probably about 60 days, which is a lot of hard work. But sometimes your blessings come from unexpected sources. When I had my grandsons with me that next summer and took them to tour the zoo, Ron Kagan found out about it and invited us to have a private guided tour. And so my grandsons and my family members, we were taken around the zoo. They got a chance to feed the giraffes. And when I took my grandsons to the area where the pavers were, because I bought a paver for my sons and grandsons,
Mm-hmm.
there was his name etched in stone. And he went back and told all of his classmates in Houston that his grandmother had bought him a zoo. So I will forever be just the world's best grand. So all that hard work paid off. So, and I'm glad to see the city, obviously we could talk a long time about the bankruptcy and the grand bargain, but I think it just shows that Detroit is resilient. Mm-hmm. And we're always going to bounce back, and I'm hopefully we'll bounce back from the current pandemic situation as well.
Yes, I have that same faith. Though we are continued to be faced with recurring themes, we are presenting them in response with our recurring resilience. We're bouncing back with each one of them. So thank you for that. Can you share with us who were your early mentors? In our panel discussion, Val Colbert-Osunwady, who's the Deputy Labor Relations, yes, listed you as one of her mentors. Who would you say are your mentors?
Well, I guess it's always nice to be able to pay it forward. I was always just so impressed with Joyce Garrett. She brought this a class and professionalism to the then personnel department before it was human resources. Mm-hmm. And I invited Denise Lewis to speak when we recognized I believe 100th anniversary of the Civil Service Commission, because she too had always been just a beacon in terms of a person who achieved so much through hard work and dedication. Mm-hmm. And I think it is important to look to people who have inspired you and in turn try and be an inspiration to others. Mm-hmm. So those were two of the ladies early in my career. I have to also speak, God rest his soul, Bill Daniels was one of our early litigators. Alberta Whitfield, who's always also joined the Ancestors, was just phenomenal litigators, world-class talent. And they too elected to stay with the city and provide this world-class service and also instruction to all of the young litigators coming along behind them.
Mm-hmm. And as I mentioned before, you serve currently on the Detroit Civil Service Commission. And in recent years, there was a presentation marking, I believe, the 100th celebration of the Civil Service Commission. Can you share with us a little bit of the history around civil service and the Civil Service Commission, and maybe just some thoughts of yours about employment today, or items that come before the commission that are of interest to you?
Well, again, I did some little research, and the civil service concept dates back to Imperial China. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons was the ruling class realized it just continued to use political or a patronage system wasn't the most efficient way to operate. So they instituted a series of exams and merit-based promotions, and it was much, much more successful using a meritocracy than just patronage. Mm-hmm. And this soon spread to other countries. In Britain in the 18th century, they instituted a system pattern on that. In the United States, the Federal Civil Service was established in 1871. And as a young country, again, people realized that you could appoint people who had helped you politically, but they might not have any knowledge. And you also always had a constant turnover, because every time there was a new political victory, then you brought in all new people. So the political appointment was not the most effective or efficient way to operate a business. And so the Civil Service Commission was designed to give everyone an equal chance. You used exams and merit-based, and it also tried to keep politics out of the operation. In 1939, the Hatch Act was passed, which actually prohibited civil service employees from conducting in political activities during their hours of employment. So there's a long history. And Detroit was one of the first cities to use a civil service based hiring practice. And so I think sometimes people forget in the history, they look at Detroit and don't realize Detroit was in the forefront in many things, not only manufacturing, but also the way the city operated. And, you know, that was one of the reasons, though I was thoroughly enjoying my retirement, I did agree, because I think it's important for us not to lose the institutional knowledge that we have and to appreciate the importance of maintaining a way for people to come into the system and based on their merit and their performance that they can advance, as opposed to just people solely appointed because of who they know or who they are.
Yeah. And are there specific employment matters or issues that have come before you that have been of interest to the commission, or some of the things that have come before you that, you know, weighed more heavily on you than others?
Well, one of our projects, we've been trying to improve the civil service rules because, again, it's like the Constitution. It's a living document. And so we have to try and, you know, make sure the rules are addressing the problems that we currently face. Unfortunately, layoffs, returning people to work, how to do that in a fair process is always an issue. And we also want to make sure that people have a notice provision so they know what to expect, leave provisions if they have to have a temporary separation from service. And we also serve as the kind of the appeal board for grievances. So we want to make sure that when people have an issue related to their employment, they have a mechanism to address that, and then we give them a full and fair hearing. So it's a pretty exciting time. You know, our meetings are not, we don't just rubber stamp. We have things to read. We have to come together. We deliberate. So it, you know, hopefully they say in old age, it's helpful to keep your mind active. So I'm deriving some personal benefit from it as well.
Absolutely. Can you share with us any of your most memorable moments in public service, a time or times that you found especially rewarding? I'm sure that 60 days and creating these agreements and spinoffs of historical in the zoo. I remember that. I remember those evening calls and times of that you guys worked so hard in helping us to put that together, putting the framework together so that it would be easy for us to meet with the employees and explain all that work was, you know, and really largely behind the scenes work that people didn't know all of the work that you all were putting in to just make sure that everything was structured in a way that employees could retain their positions and the organizations could seamlessly move forward more independently. But besides those, what other memorable moments might you share from public service or lessons that you might have learned from public service?
Well, when I was litigating cases, we had a number of cases that had the potential to be just explosive. You know, unfortunately, when we had the Malice Green situation, it was an unfortunate shooting, and the mayor, Mayor Young, was adamant that we not have a community blow up like they witnessed in California following the Rodney King case. And I guess I was both gratified as well as terrified when he wanted me to take charge of that litigation. But again, I have to say, it shows how important it is to have leadership that's sensitive to both the operation of the city as well as the needs of the community. And so we were able to address that and reach a rather swift and fair resolution, and so that we didn't have the type of community blow up that you saw in California. So in that case, unfortunately, even though we tried to move swiftly, there was still some repercussions, and I ended up working on that case for maybe 3 years. But it was very gratifying because, sometimes you feel like you are a part of history.
Yeah, and for our listeners, Brenda, you were the chief litigator, is that correct?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
I wanted them to hear that in there. So you, as chief litigator, does that mean you develop strategy and all of, talk a little bit more? I know it might seem like it's self-aggrandizing, but it's not. It's a part of history.
I have to
And
be
it's a
honest, it
part of
wasn't.
our honor to be able to present this to the LinkedIn community because they may not know who the chief litigator was and what that entails. There might be some aspiring attorney who wants to come work for the city and sees the opportunity that Brenda Braceful had. So please do elaborate.
Yes, and to be honest, like I say, I'm not going to, it wasn't just me. I had a whole, team of people working with me. But again, the Mayor Young gave us direction that, the last thing he wanted to see, as unfortunate as this incident was, it would be even more unfortunate if it caused the community just to blow up. And he didn't want it to become an incendiary matter in the community. So we got right to work. That, clearly there was some serious challenges with that. But there was both the legal aspect and also to make sure that the narrative was a positive one, because that has always been a challenge working for the city in terms of you don't control the media coverage, and people can get information from you and you see the article in the paper the next day and it's like, that's not even what I said. So all of those challenges we had to work through. But again, it was both a scary situation, but well as a very gratifying situation, because I think in the end analysis, Detroit has survived some of those situations in a much more foregoing manner than you've witnessed in other cities. So there was, in terms of writing briefs in support of our position, trying to work out the most appropriate settlement to ensure that the recipients received a settlement that would help them rebuild and move on in their lives in a positive direction. So again, it was a challenge, but I think the city certainly rose to the challenge.
Yes. And are there specific lessons that you learned from that or from any other memorable times in your journey in public service that you think you'd like to share with us?
I think one of the things people have to recognize is that, when you're in public service, it's not always about just winning. I mean, sometimes in litigation, people think, okay, there has to be a winner and there has to be a loser. But when you're in public service, you're also looking at what is in the best interest of the public. And sometimes, it may be a situation where, maybe I need to resolve this case because it's best to resolve this case and move on and take some lessons that you learn from the things that weren't done properly, as opposed to doing anything and everything to make sure my client wins, even if that is not the best precedent to set. And that can be a very challenging situation. And it's helpful if you have leadership that supports you and let's do what is the right thing to do. We're not going to lie to the public. We're not going to manipulate the evidence. We're not going to, change the numbers to fit the narrative we want to espouse. We're going to do what is the right thing to do. But in the end analysis, I found I slept better at night because, it wasn't just a question of chalking up wins on my belt, but that I had tried to be of service to the citizens of the city.
Wonderful. And Brenda, what would you say to candidates or individuals that are considering the city of Detroit or public service as a career move? What would you say about your journey that might impact their decision or they might, consider?
Well, one nice thing about public service, and I think Val is going to speak to that earlier or later, when you come into public service, because you don't necessarily have all of the additional resources, sometimes you get exposure to all aspects of the law at a much quicker pace. When we would have interns working with us, they got a chance to actually work on actual cases. We would take the interns to court with us. They got a chance to see the process. They could sit in on depositions. So you get a lot of hands-on experience that may be years in coming in other settings. And I understand the realities of that. If you're charging a client, hundreds of dollars an hour, they want to see a partner or a senior attorney there to justify that cost. In the city, we are able to utilize your talents at a much earlier stage in your development, and that hands-on experience gives you an opportunity to develop at a much faster rate. So there's some career benefits to the city service as well.
And what would you say are the most important qualities that a civil servant should possess?
I think you have to have a good sense of who you are and recognize that service may not bring you the greatest of monetary rewards, although I have no complaint. I've been able to maintain a decent standard of living, send my knucklehead children to college, and but there sometimes you have to look at a bigger picture in terms of again, had I been a 5-year attorney at a firm, there's no way I'd have an opportunity to work on a case of the magnitude of a Malice Green. No way would I be put in charge of spinning off multi-million-dollar operations like the zoo and historical museum. So you get an opportunity to develop some tremendous levels of skill, and you also get a chance to see the fruits of your labor. Even now when I go to the historical museum for some community events, Bob Burry always, much to my chagrin, calls me out in public. The fact that when I take my grandkids to the zoo, they get a chance to see their names in print. So, and at the end analysis, I always have to say, when you're ready to breathe your last breath, nobody regrets that they didn't spend more time at the office or they didn't make one extra dollar. When you look back over your life, you look at the relationships you've had, you look at your relationship with your creator, and hopefully my goal is to leave the world a better place from my having been here. And you definitely have an opportunity to do that with public service.
Well, Brenda Braceful, I want to thank you with that. That's a great way to close, I believe, because I think in your many years of service, you have touched many people in many ways and left lasting impact. So to you, as well as all of those that could be listening or watching, happy National Public Service Recognition Week. Thank you for your years of service with us. In the law department as chief litigator, as leadership in the law department, as leadership in human resources, and now continuing that service as a commissioner on the Detroit Civil Service Commission. Thank you very much, and we appreciate you so very much.
And thank you for the opportunity to participate in this appreciation, and hopefully probably in June, I look to see you in person at one of our civil service meetings.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Take
Thank
care.
you.